I really wish this was a yoga class and I could ask you to all just get on the floor in child's pose so that I could just take a minute and catch my breath. So I'm going to do that. So I stand before you to accept this honor humbly, mindful as I know that most of you are that Amy Bluell, the creator of Project Semicolon, was to be the one receiving this award. Her suicide in March was heartbreaking, a shock to us all, and truly rocked the foundation of the core of the movement that she created. But here's the thing. Amy's story isn't over, and neither is ours. That simple punctuation mark gave an ordinary keystroke new meaning and started a global conversation about mental illness and suicide that had been far too long to take traction in our society. Amy's work gave voice to many living in a world that was engulfed by mental illness and suicide. And through Project Semicolon, she took a world fragmented by differences and distilled it down to the experience of being human. And in being human, she made it okay to share our pain and our suffering. Some of you may be familiar with Brené Brown's work on vulnerability. If not, I encourage you to check out her TED Talk on the topic. In it, she talks about the strength that comes from allowing ourselves to be seen as we truly are. The strength in owning our stories, the strength in owning our imperfections and our struggles. She makes a case for vulnerability, refuting its unfortunate association with weakness. It bears repeating that vulnerability is not weakness. This soft, tender place that we call vulnerability is where it all happens, where connections are made, where strength and change are truly fortified. In sharing her vulnerability, Amy showed us how to be strong and brave and honest. She gave us a template for being kinder to one another, a framework for sharing our stories, and for sharing our humanity. She created hope for a better tomorrow for those whose lives have been touched by mental illness and suicide. That framework still remains today. Like so many of you out there, suicide and mental illness was not a part of my life, not a part of my world until that moment, that split second, that it came to define everything around me. In the moment I learned of my dad's suicide, the lens through which I saw the world changed and has never been the same. Nor dare I say what I choose it to be. And I know that might sound strange to some, but please hear me out. The pain and anguish my family and I have suffered as a result of my dad's death has been agonizing and continues to unfold painfully 20 years later. There have been, however, untold gifts and beauty that have come from this experience. Before my dad's death, I think I saw the world in black and white. But after his death, after a great deal of darkness, a new light began to shine, and I think the world became technicolor. The edges sharper, the images brighter. I knew sadness and pain like I had never known before, making the moments of joy to follow that much more extraordinary. Years ago, I discovered a sweet little poem, The Uses of Sorrow by Mary Oliver. Those of you who know me have heard it repeated many times. It goes like this. Someone I love once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift. There have been many gifts from that particular box of darkness. That box of darkness has given me this day and this moment and brought me to stand right here before you, an opportunity to share my story and to honor Amy, to continue the work of bravely making meaning from these experiences. Just a couple of months following my father's suicide in the fall of 1996, I found my way into my first loss group. I remember it well. Or should I say I have snapshots of that day that I remember well. And perhaps one of the most profound memories of that first group was in listening to the introductions, the stories of the others in the room. And what stands out most about those introductions was the grace and raw honesty of the facilitators. So for those of you that have never participated in a loss group, understand that the groups are facilitated by facilitators that are themselves survivors of suicide, always with the backup support of a lost mental health professional. So when I heard the facilitators share their personal stories, I was in awe. I couldn't imagine a day in my life that I would actually be able to talk about my dad or his death without crumbling into a pool of tears. But in that moment, the hope I felt for a future where there was space enough to hold the pain opened, and a spark was ignited, and I knew for the first time I would actually survive. So I stand here today, still unsure if I will crumble, though knowing if I do, I'm going to be okay. I know firsthand the healing that comes from sharing our stories and from sharing our experience. And it's not just in sharing my story that I found healing. It's in the very deliberate decision to use my personal experience as a catalyst for change. Some folks like to use the term fighter or warrior to describe an activist, but as a yogi, I choose to call myself a peaceful warrior, using my experience and my story to push back at the stigma surrounding suicide and mental illness, to change the way that we as a society talk about these illnesses and life in the wake of suicide. More than once, I confronted a very uncomfortable fitness instructor and asked that they change the name of a fitness drill, suicide sprints. More than once, my poor kids had to sit in the car when they were little, when I would knock on a stranger's door telling them that their Halloween decorations might make someone in their community uncomfortable. I always did these things with kindness and with gentle persistence. And sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't. But my hope was that I gave people an opportunity to see the world through my lens, if only for a moment. Like Amy, I too have been drawn to the art of tattoo as a form of personal storytelling. These permanent reminders of love, loss, and resilience are our stories. Our stories shared in ink that help to define who we are, the struggles that we've endured, and our hope for a life reimagined. Years ago, I got my first tattoo from my father, and I chose a simple lotus flower, and this is why. This flower, seemingly delicate and fragile on its surface, is willfully strong at its heart. The lotus begins its life in dark, swampy water, tethered below the surface by its roots embedded in cold, murky isolation. Despite its roots being heavily moored below the surface, that little lotus chooses daily to open towards the sun. Like the lotus, I believe and I know that we all feel that pool of darkness beneath us, but the choice remains ours to allow that pull downward or to reach daily for the light. My lotus is my reminder that though we may feel tethered to darkness, we are not restricted by it. Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese-born Buddhist monk, wrote a book entitled No Mud, No Lotus, The Art of Transforming Suffering. I love that title and the wisdom that it offers. There will be pain and suffering along the way. How we hold these experiences, how we transform them and put them back into the world is completely within our power. Through our words and conversation, through tattoos and art, through thought and action and activism, there are limitless ways to honor our past and to move forward with stubborn determination. As agents of change, we are all we need. And I do believe that our stories have just begun. Thank you.